Questions, gentlemen? I'm sure you have a few.
Yeah, I have one. Good presentation. Oh, let me have, oh, sorry about that.
I can hear you.
Let me say it again, good presentation. When you decided to use the carbon fiber composite, do you make any comparison with the steel in terms of durability and maintenance costs in the long run, or?
Yeah, we compared it on every level, and it's better than steel because it's lighter. It's actually stronger than steel. The only downside to carbon fiber, which this will be worked out, is that it has such a high hardness factor that it shatters easy. It's pretty much so strong it's brittle. By far, it has the most potential. This is an issue that's, they deal with it by doing a composite petroleum and carbon blend right now. But in the future, this is not going to be a blend. It's going to be pretty much carbon fiber. They will figure out the chemical processes behind it to make it the hardness factor not so high.
Okay. Yeah, I have a question. In your paper, you focused a lot of the benefits to freight movement, and typically these high-speed rail or high-speed facilities are for passengers. Can you expand a little bit on, in your research, if you found any examples in Japan or Germany, which they do have the maglev technology, how they deal with the freight? Because that's not something that I'm familiar with. So.
Well, from our perspective, we were thinking of the business aspect of it. In Cuba, people, they don't have money to take these high-speed trains, and they don't have the money. So from the business perspective, the passenger would have to be kind of a side aspect. Like, we move all this freight, and this is where we make our money, but we move people too. They're obviously not going to recoup all of their profit from moving people. So that's why we focused on the freight aspect of it. Did that answer your question?
Yes, I have a couple questions. Did you consider, I guess, the fact that I guess this type of train doesn't exist in the United States, but I guess Japan and Germany, I guess you mentioned, I don't know, China, is China?
Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
Is building this. But the difference is, I guess the problem with Cuba is sort of the technical expertise, because this seems to be sort of the high end of the train system. Would they able, would it be practical, and would they be able to have the expertise, first of all, probably not to build it, but to operate it and so on, and also where the financial resources come from to sort of deal with such a complex and expensive project?
Well, as far as financially, it would have to be foreign investment, and it's very conceptual in the sense that we didn't take into consideration so much the political state. Maybe conceptually, it would have to be done in the context of a little bit loosened restrictions. Did answer that second question?
Sort of, yeah.
As far as the technical aspect, Cuba actually has a really good education system. Both of my doctors are Cuban, and they're by far the best doctors I've ever had. So there would have to be some investment in education and training. But we would consider that a pro, not a con, because they do have a good educational structure. And that technology could somewhat be incorporated into it to produce an educated populace. And we're not talking about next week or next year. So we have to think about things in the long term too. Did that satisfy your?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Did you want to take
a lot of work that you showed. So, question. The trains, will that be purchased, I gather, in Japan, Germany, as Cuba doesn't have the facilities to build this structure?
That's a really good question. It's like I said before, a conglomerate approach. It's a lot of different technology from a lot of different industries, so it would have to be initially at least purchased from those respective locations where they produce some of it. The idea was to get Cubans to kind of be the expertise on bringing it all together. And then we can kind of typify that or standardize it as much as possible, as much as you can do in infrastructure, and go ahead and take that and export that combined finished product. So if they went ahead and bought, let's say, the train body from German steel and some of the electromagnetics from the Japanese producers, it would all come together there and produce a finished product that they could then market and export as a foreign GDP, foreign influx of GDP.
Okay. Did you consider this project is so large
It is.
for Cuba?
It is.
Creating phase implementation from the best markets to where the product needs to flow to, and develop it in phases.
It would have to be extensively considered yeah, phases is the only way you can do something like this, but it's a little bit outside the scope, to be honest with you, we don't have the time or the resources to do that kind of.
I understand. The last thing is basically because in industry and so much in the United States, some of the things that we looked at is the value of the product, considering the alternatives, considering the present alternatives in Cuba for transporting goods. Do you consider what would be the potential product cost of transporting this freight versus what's there today?
In that sense, it's also very conceptual in that it all depends on the amount of product being produced. If you want to consider a value per pound of product, you would have to consider the agricultural industry a lot, and that was also outside of the scope of our project.
Thank you very much.
We had one question back here.
Yeah, I think you have an interesting model that you can look at, which was the creation of the Cuban railroad system in the 1840s. Two Cubans went to Spain and they asked the Queen to guarantee a loan, and it was financed in London. And it was mostly for freight, and the first section was so successful that a year later was privatized, and that model followed throughout the island and probably had one of the most extensive railroad systems in the world at that time. So you have a model there that I think, and there's an excellent book about the history of the Cuban railroads that is even in English, that was translated a couple of years ago. But I think you have a great idea, and it could be very competitive with commercial or traditional railroads. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you guys very much for your presentation. I think we're going to segue into the third. A round of applause for FIU.
We have an additional question from Maria.
I wanted to congratulate you on your presentation, and I wanted to add the fact that this specific project could be a great way to create microeconomics for the Cuban economy, especially with the freight, because they would be able to actually produce it and take it to your stations and export it or import it nationally or outside in a faster fashion because of the speed and so forth, the transportation system. So it's not only a transportation issue, but it would be a global and internal issue as microeconomics for the Cuban people. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria.